Welcome to a journey that will fundamentally change how you approach conflict, competition, and the pursuit of power in your life. Today, we're diving deep into the ancient wisdom of Sun Tzu's Art of War, not as a military manual, but as the ultimate guide to psychological warfare and strategic dominance in modern life. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the world's most successful people have used these principles to crush their enemies, silence their critics, and rise to positions of unshakable power. The foundation of all victory: know yourself and your enemy. Sun Tzu wrote that if you know both yourself and your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. This isn't just ancient philosophy, this is the exact strategy that transformed a young Warren Buffett from a target of school bullies into one of the most feared investors on Wall Street. When Buffett was in his teens, he was relentlessly mocked for his obsession with numbers and investing. His classmates called him a nerd, excluded him from social groups, and made his life miserable. But instead of retaliating with anger or retreating into isolation, Buffett applied what would later be recognized as pure Sun Tzu strategy. He studied his tormentors with the same analytical precision he would later use to analyze companies. He understood their motivations, their insecurities, their patterns of behavior. More importantly, he knew himself. He recognized that his intellectual gifts were his greatest weapon, not his social skills or physical presence. While his bullies were focused on temporary social dominance, Buffett was building long-term strategic advantages. He was learning skills that would make him wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. Within a decade, those same bullies who had mocked him were reading about his success in newspapers. By his 30s, they were begging for investment advice. By his 50s, they were publicly praising him at high school reunions, desperately trying to associate themselves with his success. This is the power of strategic thinking over emotional reaction. Buffett never had to confront his bullies directly because he made himself so successful that their opinions became irrelevant. He didn't just win, he made the entire game they were playing obsolete. The supreme excellence: winning without fighting. Sun Tzu taught that the supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. The greatest victories are won before the battle even begins. This principle has been mastered by some of the most powerful figures in modern business and politics. Consider how Jeff Bezos handled the early criticism and mockery when he started Amazon. Traditional retailers, business experts, and media commentators ridiculed his idea of selling books online. They called it a fad, a waste of money, a guaranteed failure. Instead of engaging in public debates or defending his vision through arguments, Bezos applied the art of war principle of winning without fighting. He focused entirely on execution. While his critics were busy talking, he was busy building. He understood that the best response to mockery is overwhelming success. Every day that Amazon grew stronger, his critics grew weaker. Every milestone Amazon achieved made their previous statements look more foolish. The beauty of this strategy is that Bezos never had to directly confront his critics. He simply made their criticism irrelevant through superior performance. When Amazon became the dominant force in retail, those same critics who had mocked him were forced to praise his vision. Some even applied for jobs at his company. This is psychological warfare at its finest. Bezos didn't just succeed, he forced his critics to publicly acknowledge their mistakes. He turned his enemies into admirers without ever directly attacking them. They defeated themselves through their own short-sightedness. The art of positioning: choosing your battles wisely. Sun Tzu emphasized that the clever combatant looks to the effect of combined energy and does not require too much from individuals. This translates to modern success as the art of positioning yourself in situations where victory is inevitable. Look at how Oprah Winfrey transformed from a bullied child into one of the most influential people in the world. As a young girl, she faced horrific abuse, poverty, and constant ridicule for her appearance, her background, and her dreams. Lesser people would have been broken by such treatment. But Winfrey understood intuitively what Sun Tzu taught about positioning. Instead of trying to succeed in environments where she was disadvantaged, she created her own arena. She didn't try to become a traditional news anchor where her appearance and background would work against her. Instead, she pioneered a new form of television that played to her natural strengths: empathy, authenticity, and emotional intelligence. When Winfrey launched her talk show, she wasn't just starting a career, she was creating a new battlefield where the rules favored her natural abilities. Her critics and doubters were suddenly playing a game where their traditional advantages meant nothing. In this new arena, authenticity mattered more than pedigree, emotional intelligence mattered more than formal education, and genuine connection mattered more than superficial polish. The result was total domination. Winfrey didn't just succeed in television, she redefined what success in media looked like. Her former critics and bullies could only watch as she built a media empire worth billions. Many of them ended up working for companies that were part of her network or trying to copy her format. This is the power of strategic positioning. Instead of fighting battles where victory is uncertain, you create new battlefields where victory is inevitable. You don't overcome your weaknesses, you make them irrelevant by changing the game entirely. The speed of victory, timing, and momentum. Sun Tzu wrote that rapidity is the essence of war, and those skilled in war avoid the enemy when his spirit is keen and attack when it is sluggish and his soldiers homesick. In modern terms, this means understanding when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to consolidate your position. Elon Musk's rise to power demonstrates this principle perfectly. In his early days at PayPal, Musk faced significant opposition from co-founders and investors who questioned his leadership abilities and vision. Instead of engaging in prolonged corporate warfare, Musk recognized the perfect moment to strike. When eBay offered to acquire PayPal for $1.5 billion, Musk could have fought the acquisition to maintain control. Instead, he recognized this as the perfect moment to execute a strategic retreat that would give him the resources for a much larger victory. He allowed the acquisition to proceed, walked away with enough money to fund his next ventures, and left his critics to manage someone else's company. While his former adversaries were celebrating their corporate victory, Musk was already planning his next moves. He used his PayPal windfall to simultaneously launch SpaceX, invest in Tesla, and begin building his empire. By the time his PayPal critics realized what was happening, Musk was already becoming a household name through his revolutionary companies. The timing was perfect. His critics were locked into managing a traditional tech company while he was revolutionizing multiple industries. They had won a small battle but lost the war for relevance and influence. Today, most people can't even name the executives who pushed Musk out of PayPal, but everyone knows Musk as the man who's changing the world through electric vehicles and space exploration. The psychology of deception, appearing weak when strong. Sun Tzu taught that all warfare is based on deception, and when capable, we must appear incapable. The most successful people often use this principle to devastating effect, allowing their enemies to underestimate them while they build unstoppable momentum. Mark Cuban's journey from a bartender to a billionaire demonstrates this strategy brilliantly. Throughout his early career, Cuban was consistently underestimated by traditional business leaders who saw him as just another loud, inexperienced entrepreneur. Instead of trying to prove them wrong through confrontation, Cuban used their underestimation as a strategic advantage. When Cuban started his first company, MicroSolutions, established competitors didn't take him seriously. They saw a young man without an MBA, without connections, without the traditional markers of business success. This dismissal was exactly what Cuban needed. While they ignored him, he was learning their weaknesses, understanding their customers' frustrations, and building solutions they couldn't imagine. Cuban deliberately maintained a casual, approachable persona that made competitors think he wasn't a serious threat. He dressed casually, spoke plainly, and avoided the pretentious language that dominated the tech industry. His competitors mistook this authenticity for lack of sophistication. By the time they realized Cuban was a serious threat, it was too late. He had already captured significant market share and built relationships they couldn't break. When Cuban sold MicroSolutions for millions, his former critics could only watch in amazement as the person they had dismissed as unsophisticated walked away with more money than most of them would ever see. This pattern repeated throughout Cuban's career. Each time he entered a new industry, established players underestimated him, and each time he used their arrogance against them. When he bought the Dallas Mavericks, NBA insiders dismissed him as another rich guy playing with toys. When he started appearing on Shark Tank, traditional investors thought he was just seeking publicity. In every case, Cuban's apparent casualness masked intense strategic thinking and relentless execution. His enemies kept underestimating him until they found themselves either working for him or watching him dominate their industries. The unity of command, building unstoppable teams. Sun Tzu emphasized that the general who thoroughly understands the advantages that accompany variation of tactics knows how to handle his troops. In modern success, this translates to building teams and alliances that multiply your power exponentially. Steve Jobs' return to Apple demonstrates this principle masterfully. When Jobs came back to Apple in 1997, the company was nearly bankrupt, and his critics were everywhere. Industry experts, former Apple employees, and business journalists all predicted his failure. They remembered the difficult, demanding perfectionist who had been forced out of his own company. Instead of trying to prove his critics wrong through individual brilliance, Jobs applied Sun Tzu's principle of unity of command. He assembled a team of the most talented people in the industry and created a culture where their combined abilities could create products no individual could imagine alone. The genius of Jobs' strategy was that he made his team members feel like they were part of something historically significant. Jonathan Ive didn't just design products for Apple. He was reshaping how humanity interacted with technology. Tim Cook wasn't just managing operations. He was building the supply chain that would deliver miracles to millions of people. This wasn't just good management. It was psychological warfare against Apple's competitors. While other tech companies were dealing with internal politics, ego conflicts, and divided loyalty, Apple operated like a unified army with a single mission. Their competitors couldn't match this level of coordination and focus. The results speak for themselves. Apple didn't just recover. They redefined entire industries and became the most valuable company in history. Jobs' critics weren't just proven wrong. They became irrelevant. Many of them ended up studying Apple's methods and trying to copy their success. Jobs had transformed himself from a failed entrepreneur into the leader of the most innovative company on earth. His former enemies could only watch as he achieved something they had said was impossible, making Apple more successful than it had ever been before. The art of intelligence. Information is ultimate power. Sun Tzu wrote that what enables the wise sovereign and the good general to strike and conquer is foreknowledge. In today's world, information isn't just power, it's the ultimate weapon that separates winners from losers. Reed Hastings' transformation of Netflix from a DVD by-mail service into a streaming giant demonstrates how superior intelligence gathering can destroy entire industries. When Hastings started talking about streaming video, traditional media executives laughed at him. Blockbuster, Hollywood studios, and cable companies all dismissed Netflix as a niche player that would never threaten their dominance. These industry leaders made a classic strategic error. They assumed their current advantages would protect them forever. They had massive infrastructure investments, established relationships with content creators, and decades of experience in entertainment distribution. What they didn't have was accurate intelligence about changing consumer behavior and technological possibilities. Hastings, meanwhile, was obsessively gathering data about viewing habits, internet speeds, content preferences, and technology costs. While his competitors were defending their existing business models, he was building detailed intelligence about the future of entertainment consumption. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was devastating. Netflix used their superior intelligence to make strategic decisions that seemed impossible to their competitors. They invested in original content when everyone said it was too expensive. They expanded internationally when everyone said streaming wouldn't work globally. They killed their own DVD business when everyone said it was too profitable to abandon. Each decision that seemed crazy to industry insiders was actually based on intelligence that traditional media companies either didn't have or didn't understand. By the time Blockbuster, cable companies, and movie studios realized what was happening, Netflix had already won the war. Today, Netflix is worth more than most traditional media companies combined. Reed Hastings transformed from an outsider that industry veterans dismissed into the person who destroyed their entire industry and rebuilt it according to his vision. The momentum of success, when victory becomes inevitable. Sun Tzu taught that in war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. But he also understood that once you achieve momentum, you can become unstoppable by making your strength so overwhelming that resistance becomes futile. Bill Gates' rise to dominance in personal computing illustrates this principle perfectly. In the early days of Microsoft, Gates faced ridicule from established computer companies who saw him as just another young programmer with big dreams. IBM executives literally laughed at him during meetings. Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak dismissed MS-DOS as inferior technology. Instead of trying to prove his technical superiority, Gates focused on building momentum through strategic partnerships and market positioning. While his competitors were fighting over technical specifications, Gates was securing deals that would make Microsoft software essential to the personal computer revolution. The genius of Gates' strategy was that he understood how momentum works in technology markets. Once Microsoft became the standard, it became increasingly difficult for competitors to challenge that position. Every new computer that shipped with Microsoft software made the next computer more likely to ship with Microsoft software. As Microsoft's momentum built, something remarkable happened. Former critics started becoming allies. Companies that had dismissed Gates began licensing Microsoft technology. Programmers who had mocked MS-DOS started developing applications for Windows. Industry executives who had laughed at Microsoft's ambitions started trying to schedule meetings with Gates. This wasn't just business success, it was a complete reversal of power dynamics. Gates had transformed from a target of industry mockery into the person whose decisions could make or break entire companies. His former critics weren't just proven wrong, they became dependent on his goodwill for their survival. By the time Microsoft reached its peak, Gates had achieved something that Sun Tzu would have recognized as the ultimate victory. He had made resistance to his power more costly than submission to it. Fighting Microsoft became a guaranteed path to failure, while cooperating with Microsoft became the smart business decision. The flexibility of water, adapting to overcome any obstacle. Sun Tzu compared successful strategy to water, which has no constant form but adapts to overcome any obstacle. The most successful people understand that rigid thinking leads to defeat, while flexible adaptation leads to inevitable victory. Richard Branson's career demonstrates this principle across multiple industries. When Branson started Virgin Records, music industry executives dismissed him as an amateur who didn't understand the business. When he launched Virgin Atlantic, airline industry veterans said he would be crushed by established carriers. When he started Virgin Mobile, telecommunications experts predicted immediate failure. In each case, Branson's competitors made the same mistake. They assumed he would play by their rules. Instead, Branson consistently demonstrated the flexibility to adapt his approach based on the specific characteristics of each industry and situation. When competing against established record labels, Branson didn't try to build a traditional music company. Instead, he created a more artist-friendly alternative that attracted musicians who felt exploited by major labels. When challenging British Airways, he didn't try to compete on operational efficiency, he focused on customer experience and brand personality. This adaptability wasn't just smart business, it was psychological warfare. Branson's competitors never knew what to expect because he refused to be limited by industry conventions. Every time they prepared to defend against one type of attack, Branson would approach from a completely different angle. The results have been extraordinary. Branson has successfully challenged established players in dozens of industries, from music to airlines, to telecommunications, to space travel. His critics in each industry have been forced to either adapt to his innovations or watch him capture market share with approaches they never anticipated. Today, Branson is recognized as one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, and his former critics in various industries either work for companies that copied his methods or have been replaced by people who understand the new rules he created. The art of timing, knowing when to strike. Sun Tzu emphasized that he who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy who is not, will be victorious. The most successful people understand that patience and perfect timing often matter more than raw talent or resources. Michael Jordan's transformation from a talented college player into the greatest basketball player of all time demonstrates this principle beautifully. When Jordan entered the NBA, he faced skepticism from players, coaches, and media who questioned whether his college success would translate to professional basketball. Instead of trying to immediately prove his dominance, Jordan demonstrated the patience that Sun Tzu would have admired. He studied his opponents, learned from defeats, and waited for the perfect moment to assert his superiority. When other players were focused on individual statistics, Jordan was building the skills and relationships that would make team success inevitable. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was systematic. Each season, Jordan became more complete as a player and leader. Each playoff series taught him lessons about what it takes to win at the highest level. Each defeat motivated him to eliminate weaknesses that opponents had exploited. When Jordan finally achieved his breakthrough, the timing was perfect. He had developed his skills to the point where no individual could stop him, and he had built team chemistry that made the Chicago Bulls unstoppable. His former critics could only watch as he dominated the sport in ways they had said were impossible. The psychological impact was devastating. Players who had dismissed Jordan early in his career found themselves being embarrassed on national television. Coaches who had developed strategies to stop him discovered that their plans were irrelevant against his evolved abilities. Jordan didn't just become successful. He made his critics look foolish for ever doubting him. Many of the players who had initially dismissed him later praised him as the greatest player they had ever seen. Some even requested trades to play alongside him. The compound effect, small advantages that create total domination. Sun Tzu understood that victory often comes from accumulating small advantages until they become overwhelming superiority. The most successful people apply this principle by consistently making decisions that seem minor but compound into unstoppable momentum. Warren Buffett's investment philosophy demonstrates this compound effect perfectly. When Buffett started his investment partnership, Wall Street professionals dismissed his approach as too conservative and unsophisticated. They mocked his focus on undervalued companies and his refusal to chase hot trends. These critics made a fundamental error in understanding how compound growth works over time. While they were focused on quarterly results and annual performance, Buffett was building a system that would create wealth over decades. Each investment decision that seemed boring to his critics was actually part of a larger strategy that would eventually make him the world's most successful investor. The power of this approach became clear over time. While his critics experienced the typical cycles of boom and bust, Buffett's wealth grew steadily year after year. Small advantages in stock selection, risk management, and business analysis compounded into performance that seemed impossible to replicate. What made Buffett's success particularly devastating to his critics was that his methods were completely transparent. He published annual letters explaining exactly how he made investment decisions. Yet, even with access to his thinking, his critics couldn't replicate his results because they lacked the patience and discipline to execute his strategy consistently. Today, Buffett is worth over $100 billion, and his former critics either study his methods or pretend they always respected his approach. Many of the Wall Street professionals who initially dismissed him now quote his investment philosophy and try to associate themselves with his success. The network effect, building alliances that multiply power. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme excellence is to subdue the enemy without fighting, and this often requires building alliances that make your position unassailable. The most successful people understand that individual brilliance has limits, but strategic relationships can create unlimited power. Reid Hoffman's transformation from a philosophy student into one of Silicon Valley's most influential figures demonstrates this principle masterfully. When Hoffman started his career, technology industry veterans dismissed him as too academic and theoretical for the practical world of business. Instead of trying to prove his technical abilities, Hoffman focused on building relationships that would multiply his influence exponentially. He understood that in the technology industry, success often comes from connecting the right people at the right time rather than from individual achievement. This approach seemed inefficient to his critics, who focused on building specific technical skills or accumulating traditional business credentials. They saw Hoffman's networking activities as a waste of time that distracted from more important work. The transformation happened gradually, then suddenly. As Hoffman's network grew, his ability to create successful companies multiplied exponentially. When he co-founded LinkedIn, he didn't just have a good idea, he had access to the exact people needed to execute that idea perfectly. The network effects became unstoppable. LinkedIn's success made Hoffman even more valuable as a connector and advisor. His early investments in companies like Facebook and Airbnb weren't just lucky guesses, they were the result of having relationships that gave him access to the best opportunities before they were widely known. Today, Hoffman is recognized as one of Silicon Valley's most important figures, and his former critics either work for companies in his network or try to gain access to his circle of influence. Many of the people who initially dismissed his relationship-focused approach now study his methods and try to build similar networks. The long game, building legacy that outlasts critics. Sun Tzu understood that the greatest victories create lasting change that makes future conflicts unnecessary. The most successful people think beyond immediate success to build legacies that transform entire industries and societies. Oprah Winfrey's evolution from a local talk show host into a global media empire demonstrates this long-term strategic thinking. When Winfrey started her television career, media executives saw her as filling a temporary niche that would eventually be replaced by more traditional programming. These executives made a crucial error. They assumed that success in media required conforming to existing formats and audience expectations. They couldn't imagine that someone could fundamentally change what television could accomplish. Winfrey understood that true power comes from creating new categories rather than competing in existing ones. Instead of trying to become the best traditional talk show host, she pioneered a new form of media that combined entertainment, education, and inspiration in ways that hadn't been attempted before. The transformation was revolutionary. Winfrey didn't just succeed in television. She changed how society thinks about media's potential to create positive change. Her show became a platform for launching authors, promoting social causes, and inspiring personal transformation on a scale that traditional media executives had never imagined. This legacy approach created something her critics couldn't attack, a form of influence that transcended any particular medium or format. Even when her daily show ended, Winfrey's impact continued through her network, her school, her book club, and her ongoing media projects. Today, media executives study Winfrey's methods and try to replicate her impact. Many of the people who initially dismissed her as a temporary phenomenon now acknowledge her as one of the most influential media figures in history. The transformation from victim to victor. The most powerful application of Sun Tzu's principles is the complete transformation from someone who was bullied and dismissed into someone whose success makes previous criticism irrelevant. This isn't just about achieving success. It's about achieving the kind of success that forces your former tormentors to acknowledge their mistakes publicly. Consider how these principles work together in the story of Jack Ma, who transformed from a repeatedly rejected job applicant into the founder of Alibaba, one of the world's most valuable companies. Ma faced rejection and ridicule at every stage of his early career. He was rejected from dozens of jobs, including positions at KFC and the police force. When he first proposed creating an internet company in China, investors laughed at him and said Chinese people would never shop online. Ma's critics made every possible argument against his success. They said he didn't understand technology, didn't understand business, didn't understand the Chinese market, and was too naive to compete against established companies. Instead of being discouraged by this criticism, Ma applied Sun Tzu's principles systematically. He studied his critics to understand their assumptions and blind spots. He built alliances with people who shared his vision of the internet's potential in China. He positioned Alibaba in market segments that established companies ignored. He remained flexible as market conditions changed, adapting his strategy while maintaining his core vision. Most importantly, Ma understood that the ultimate victory wouldn't come from proving his critics wrong through arguments. It would come from making their criticism irrelevant through overwhelming success. The transformation was complete when Alibaba went public in 2014 with the largest IPO in history. Ma's former critics weren't just proven wrong. They were forced to publicly acknowledge that they had failed to recognize one of the most significant business opportunities of their generation. Today, many of the investors who rejected Ma early in his career publicly tell stories about missing the opportunity to invest in Alibaba. The business experts who said Chinese people wouldn't shop online now study Alibaba's methods. The technology executives who dismissed Ma as technically incompetent now acknowledge him as a visionary who understood the internet's potential better than they did. The ultimate victory, making your success inevitable. The final lesson from Sun Tzu is that the highest skill is not winning 100 victories in 100 battles, but subduing the enemy without any battle at all. In modern terms, this means creating a position so strong that criticism becomes impossible and former enemies have no choice but to become allies or admirers. This is exactly what Amazon's Jeff Bezos achieved in his relationship with traditional retailers who initially mocked his online bookstore concept. Rather than engaging in public debates about the future of retail, Bezos focused on building a company so successful that criticism would become obviously foolish. The strategy worked perfectly. As Amazon grew from an online bookstore into the dominant force in multiple industries, former critics were forced to either adapt to the new reality Bezos had created or become irrelevant. Many traditional retailers who had dismissed e-commerce found themselves trying to copy Amazon's methods or going out of business entirely. The psychological transformation was complete. Bezos had gone from being mocked as a naive dreamer to being studied as a business genius. His former critics now analyze his strategies, quote his principles, and try to predict his next moves. This is the ultimate application of Sun Tzu's principles, victory so complete that it transforms not just your position, but the entire landscape in which you operate. Your former bullies don't just stop criticizing you, they start praising you. Your former enemies don't just leave you alone, they actively seek your approval and advice. Your path to strategic dominance. Understanding these principles intellectually is only the beginning. The real power comes from applying them systematically to transform your own position from victim to victor. This means developing the patience to play the long game, the intelligence to understand your opponent's weaknesses, the flexibility to adapt your approach as circumstances change, and the persistence to accumulate small advantages until they become overwhelming superiority. The most important lesson from all these examples is that strategic thinking beats emotional reaction every time. When someone bullies you, dismisses you, or underestimates you, your first instinct might be to prove them wrong immediately through confrontation or argument. But Sun Tzu's principles teach us that the most devastating response is to make their criticism irrelevant through superior performance and strategic positioning. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or avoiding all conflict. It means choosing your battles carefully, fighting them on terms that favor your strengths, and winning them so decisively that future conflicts become unnecessary. The people whose stories we've explored didn't just overcome their critics, they transformed the entire playing field so that their former disadvantages became irrelevant and their natural strengths became decisive advantages. They created new rules that favored their abilities and made their critics' advantages obsolete. This is the true power of strategic thinking. You don't just win individual battles. You restructure reality so that victory becomes inevitable and criticism becomes impossible. Remember that every person who dismissed Warren Buffett's investment approach now studies his methods. Every media executive who underestimated Oprah now tries to replicate her impact. Every retailer who mocked Jeff Bezos now struggles to compete with Amazon. Every investor who rejected Jack Ma now tells stories about missing the opportunity to invest in Alibaba. Your current critics and bullies are giving you the same opportunity. They're underestimating you, dismissing your potential, and providing you with the motivation and strategic intelligence you need to achieve success beyond their imagination. The question isn't whether you can transform your position. The question is whether you have the patience, intelligence, and strategic discipline to apply these principles consistently until victory becomes inevitable. If you're still here, that means you're serious about changing your life. Comment warrior below and let me know that you're ready to change your life. Let me know that you're ready to stop being a victim of other people's limitations and start building the kind of success that makes criticism impossible. The principles are proven. The examples are clear. The only question remaining is whether you're ready to begin your transformation from someone who gets pushed around into someone whose success makes your former bullies bow down in recognition of what you've achieved. Your strategic transformation starts now. The only question is how far you're willing to go to make your success inevitable.